Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of Between the Headlines with me, Amina Taylor in London. Well, joining me tonight are two seasoned broadcasters and a well-heeled campaigner. On my right is Phil Reese. He's an award-winning journalist turned broadcaster who's reported from frontline position, including the very dangerous Afghanistan. Alongside him is Moeen Yassin, the managing director of Global Vision 2000 Limited, a pan-Islamic organization. And rounding off tonight's panel is broadcaster Ayo Johnson. His weekly radio show on South FM is a mainstay of the African-Caribbean community in the UK. Phil, he really is turning into the Billy No-Mates of Europe. Is it possible to fall from grace as quickly as Gordon Brown seems to do? Why 4 hours late? Why not bother showing at all?
Well, it reminds me of what the leader of the British Liberal Democratic Party said, that he was once considered Stalin, somebody who, perhaps wasn't very charismatic, but managed his party and would manage the government with a kind of ruthless efficiency. And he said that Brown had moved from being Stalin to Mr. Bean. This is the popular sort of character that Rowan Atkinson, the comedian, plays in the movies. Well, it is remarkable. I wonder whether this had been planned. I mean, the issue of Europe is the elephant in the room for both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party. It has been for years. And if this was a snub that was intended to play up to the newspapers, in other words, to show that he doesn't care about Europe, it's backfired badly.
If we just have a quick look there at the Times page, I hope the graphics coming up on this shows the entirety of this photo, because it's David Miliband actually being forced to shake hands with an usher, because as the ministers would file up on stage one by one, the foreign minister would sign and shake hands with the prime minister or the president. It turns out Miliband was alone. In a lot of this, Moeen, to come or not to come? Surely that must have been the question. A Commons Liaison Committee meeting was blamed for the absence. This must have been in the diary for some time. Small matter of sign EU treaty.
Well, it's quite clear Miliband appears to be the fall boy. I would argue, these things don't just happen willy-nilly. It looks as though it was planned. There is a thing called media spin doctors, There's a whole industry underpinning how these guys move, breathe, etc. So, there's more to this than the gestures. Having said that, there is a bigger issue here. And the bigger issue is how elected politicians, parliamentarians, and the public, you and me, are sidestepped in the key decisions which affect the destiny of Europeans. Not just nations like Belgium, which may break up, but, defence and security issues being signed away. So although he has shown some sort of resistance, by being late, if you want to use that word. It's barely resistance because his signature is there. I think there's a bigger issue here. He has actually signed up to signing away the rights of British citizens on certain matters.
His prestige, any kind of recognition that he might have been held in high esteem by his peers, that must have been ebbed away a little bit, Ayo.
Yes, to an extent, and it shows the level of pressure that Gordon Brown is on. I'm sure when he thought about taking up the job, thought about it was going to be slightly easy, this must be a misfit, but really, he wasn't bold enough to call a general election. He wasn't bold enough to go for a referendum and ask the British public as to how they felt about the treaty. And he wanted to distance himself from this treaty altogether. But he was caught in two minds. A man who was wrestling with his own demons within his head and wishing that he didn't have the opportunity to actually go there, and thought last minute to join up. So I think he's come out slightly weaker and shown that he's slightly confused and wanting to be on two positions. On one position, trying to give the British public the perception that he's not fully behind Europe. He has his own way, but in principle he's giving away all the rights that you and I aspire to in this country. So it's a mixed bag altogether, I think.
And you see, part of the reason, if we talk about what you said about the issues of Europe, the rights of British people, there is no debate in the British press about this because the politicians are so scared about having a realistic debate about these issues. So it's kind of sidestepped all the time. And as you say, Brown probably wanted to secretly sign this away because the implications of Britain not signing it are huge, but he didn't want anyone to know about it. I mean, isn't that ridiculous?
So by showing up, undercover, 4 hours late. Isn't it just embarrassing all around? It's like pretending you're not going to a wedding but really trying to get in through the back door.
Well, if that, if what you say is true, that it was planned, I mean, I think he needs a new bunch of advisors, because I think they've messed it up. Because, and as, you mentioned earlier, leaving the limelight to people like Sarkozy, because one thing that Blair did do is, he did send British interests abroad with a certain charisma, and Brown is seriously showing that he can't do that.
I think it's more than that. I think Brown would like to do a bit more. He's always given the perception around the world of someone who cares about human rights, freedom of speech, and that's what the entire treaty is all about. It's about giving up all the things all the values that we hold dear, for Brussels to make those decisions for us. So I think he would rather, if this were to go away, not to happen at this juncture where he's struggling in the polls, where the Conservatives are gaining ground all the time, and more so about the fact that he himself is looking very lame, especially when people think about how Blair used to do it, and so he's playing second fiddle really. And
to a man who isn't even there anymore.
Well, the legacy of Blair was, Blair's been around for 10 years, and he'd been a number 2 for so long, and to stand up and to be counted in the same shoes as the man himself, Blair, it's a tall order.
Moeen, is he finding them larger shoes than he thought in the interim?
Well, he's from my fellow university, my alma mater. I think, he's in a crisis. You've got the financial crisis, Northern Rock, you've got many other issues, the Labour Party sleaze. I think this is where a leader shows his mettle. And Gordon Brown appears to seem to be lacking certain substance, to say the least.
It was a charge levelled at its predecessor, one T. Blair. And where does he show up next after having to deal with taunts of being Mr. George Bush's poodle for many years? And what does he do? He shows up in the White House Christmas video. Surely, Phil. Never a more strategically ill-advised move.
Well, I thought it was a spoof, actually, when I first saw it. I mean, Bush doesn't look particularly serious in it. Here we are, the United States and Britain involved in wars around the world. And, Bush looking incredibly awkward and, talking about 2 Scottish Terriers. I mean, I think it is quite ridiculous. I mean, as I say, it is funny if it wasn't so sick. And as you say, Bush looks ridiculous, but we're kind of used to that. But then to have Blair addressing the American audience, I bet you he didn't want that to be seen in Britain, because he talks, he says, I'm born in Edinburgh, Scotland. Well, people don't say that in Britain, do they? They say that to the American audience.
And if we just have a quick look, we can spot, I think
dear, this is unbelievable.
I think that's Barney there with the ball as we speak.
Yes. I think it's indicative, really, of you think about a movie title, calling it The White House, starred by 3 movie stars. You got the dog there, and Blair and Bush. So it doesn't sound very nice to me, as far as I'm concerned, talking to a dog on a program like that. And
it shouldn't happen to an ex-prime minister, should it?
Well, it shouldn't. But it's with Bush we can come to terms with that. But Blair, the perception I had of him was a very serious man, a man who would not stoop to this level, and really to be seen on the same footing with Bush, playing around with a dog and talking about about the park and so on and so forth, and how much to spend 1.5 billion or thereabout or whatever it was. I think that was rather silly.